I believe when you look at the research, there is no evidence that I see that it's actually even possible to motivate another human being. Motivation comes from within for us. Now, can I, in a leadership role, interact with people on my team in a way that helps them find their motivation? Yes. And in fact, in the clinical world, although it has now made its way into the work world, there's a modality called motivational interviewing, which is an entire way of interacting with someone to help them discover what they would be motivated to do. It was created mostly to work with folks in the addiction world. It is now, you find it all over the place, and just finished a book on how to bring it into the workplace. So let's say I have someone on my team at work who keeps coming to work late. All right, so the person in leadership, and it still goes on because I hear this all the time from leaders, well, I'm told from above, I'm supposed to be able to motivate them to come to work on time. You tell me how well that's working. Versus interacting with them in a way that gets curious with them in where they are motivated to make a change in their own behavior. Now, the challenge of that sometimes is they might be motivated to change or not change something that you would like them to change or not change.
Right.
Also, in the workplace, it does not mean if I say, well, I'm not motivated to come to work on time. Well, it is the workplace, and there are some expectations that you will show up to work on time. So, I don't know, maybe you put your employment at risk, but that's your choice. At the very least, I do not believe that you can inject that person with motivation. To your point, what we definitely know is helping people move forward. The strategy that has been taught to leaders forever and ever and ever, which is somewhat what you were describing a moment ago of convince, coerce, control, tell, sell, yell. There is no evidence that has ever worked. But it's what leaders were taught. In addition to, you're responsible to motivate people. And so this is what we do. A lot of my work is built on a foundation of a modality called conversational intelligence, which was created by this brilliant woman by the name of Judith Glaser. And what CIQ looks at is how certain conversational patterns and strategies, when used with another human being, cause that other human being's brain to either say, I trust you or I don't. And most of what has been taught in the leadership world causes people's brains to say, I don't trust you, I don't feel valued, I don't feel appreciated, you don't see strength in me. Thinking that people are going to get motivated by you always pointing out what they're not doing well, there's no evidence that works at all versus being very strength-based with people. And so now in my work and other people use it as well, we can sit with leaders and it is no longer just a touchy-feely conversation. Oh, you should be nicer to your employees. Now it is plain old neuroscience. All right, I will show you.
It's about time.
The neuroscientific evidence that if you interact with your team this way, this is probably what you're going to get. And this is what's going to be going on in their heads versus how you relationship build and see strength in people and voice appreciation and value and think ahead of time of what do I need to do in my specific relationship with Scott for he and I to develop a level of trust and safety, or we're going nowhere. And that is, being able to walk into companies now, and it's not just this social worky, that's how I know people see it sometimes. It's not just this social worky thing. No, hard science. Hard science. You want to argue with the science? Go ahead. But there is no question about what goes on in people's brains based on the specifics of how other people interact with them.
And that's why a lot of these really, really big, like Fortune 500 companies are putting so much money into training.
Yes.
Because they're recognizing and they're seeing the results of this happening.
Yes.
And it's like, this is clearly working, so let's do it. Because Judith used to always say, I had the privilege to train with her about 10 years ago before she passed away. She always used to say that her belief was that, especially in the workplace, I think this is probably true around the Thanksgiving table, 9 out of 10 conversations miss the mark.
Right? 9 out of 10 conversations in the workplace do not produce what one or both people wanted. And that is based in because we don't spend any amount of time thinking about what strategies do we want to engage in the conversational world that increase the chances you and I are going to connect. If we connect, we will problem solve well. We will deal with conflict well. We will both feel valued and appreciated. If we connect, we will co-create, come up with an answer that is a portion of you and I, which is much greater than either you or I. We don't do that. And so it's always interesting because in my work, I often hear from folks I work with, well, Keith, all these strategies you have sound great, but I think they're going to just take too much time. And we don't have time because our days are busy. And again, because I've gotten really direct about it, it's all right, you tell me. How many conversations do you walk out of either one-on-one or with your team and it didn't produce anything? And that could be anything from people entered the room with different ideas about what the goal of the conversation was or the role in the conversation, or one of the biggest dynamics you will run into on teams is there is someone around the table who, as the team is talking about the table, they're the one banging on the table. No, I'm right. So in the conversational intelligence world, we call it the addiction of being right. I'm right. But what we now know is that person, when that person is doing it, if there's 9 other people around the table, there's 9 other brains in the room who interpret that as, I can't trust this person. It's not safe for me to speak up, so I'm not saying anything. We can address that now. We can help people take a look, if you're going to be in conversations, given the importance of your work, don't you want them to be productive? And productive is some version of win-win, I guess, or the team problem solves together or innovates together. But it's not happening in most workplaces.
Now, for the small business, for the mom and pops who you also work with, what do you do to get them going, to get them to, do you have like an introductory kind of like, look, try this and you're going to see what I'm talking about?
So the first thing I do is I ask lots of questions. I get curious about what their experiences are when they come together and have conversation. What is or isn't working. And again, what I often hear across my clients is I don't feel heard, or we sit down to solve a problem and the conversation goes nowhere, or we get stuck in that addiction of being right. I'm right, I'm right, you're wrong dynamic, which goes nowhere. And so it's not difficult I don't find it very difficult to help people pretty quickly be able to identify what's not working. It's also really important to identify what is, right? So what are the strengths around the table that do seem to be working? What when there is evidence that the conversation is productive, maybe what are you guys doing differently at that moment? So we talk about all of that. And what I am able to do is I am able to give some examples that most people can relate to that highlight this issue of what happens when there's not trust and safety in the room. So here's an example. So I will say to a leader, all right, you're up in front of your team, or I might be working with an entire team. The team gets pulled into a conference room. The leader of the team is up in front of the room, sharing with great excitement about some new initiative that's coming down the pike and what it means for this team and for the company. And it might mean some extra time and energy. But man, we're going to do it and it's great. And around the table, there's a bit of, an excited murmur. Oh yeah, boss, that sounds really good. Yeah, we're really in, but sounds good. Meeting ends. What conversations take place in the next few days?
He's crazy. What is he talking about?
Right. The water cooler conversations, right?
Yeah.
Smaller groups of people. Tenor is not so positive. He's crazy. What is he talking about? Nobody asks me. I have more than enough on my plate right now. I can't take this on. And so then I would ask whoever, my audience is, what is your best explanation for the water cooler conversations. And the most obvious explanation is there wasn't enough trust in the room for people to speak their truth. So they didn't. I would then say that was a wasted conversation. If you spent an hour in that conference room, that was a waste of time. Versus taking 15 minutes, and there's a variety of exercises and strategies that I can share with leaders and teams to put some things in place that identify. I call it now the conversation about the conversation. What strategies do we want to use that will increase the chances when we start talking about business, it's going to be productive? As soon as you give that example of the water cooler conversation, everyone starts laughing because everyone's dealt with that. Or I might say, all right, I want you to think about the last time you were in a conversation with someone at work. Conversation went to shit, went right down the tubes. You walked away spitting and sputtering, all pissed off at each other. If I walked up to either one of you right at that moment and I said, okay, right now give me your best explanation for why what just happened, what would y'all tell me? Well, the other person's an asshole. Right. Okay. Tell me how well that explanation moves the next conversation forward.
Right.
Because you're going to walk back into that room. It could be 6 months later. Our memory of uncomfortable emotion is greater than our memory of positive emotion. And you're going to remember that conversation, or you won't remember the words. You'll remember the feeling.
The feeling, yeah.
And there's Scott again. He's going to be a jerk again. But so how about we come up with a better explanation that is much more scientific, right? That is based in neuroscience. People get it. Like people get when you identify it and describe it of any dynamic where they do not feel appreciated and valued, where they do not feel heard, listened to, people get it. It's just, we experience it and we haven't been given permission to think about it and to then engage with my team in conversation in how to make this different.
How do you deal with the scoffers? Because there's always going to be a scoffer that goes, oh, enough with this bleeding heart shit. Oh, wah, my feelings, wah.
Yeah.
Because there's always going to be somebody
always going to be there. Yeah, I don't know. I find giving some real life examples makes it really hard to scoff at it.
Yeah.
I think. Being able to lead with neuroscience makes it really hard to scoff at it. And yet those folks are out there because
science schmience.
Yes, science schmience. Look, here's what I think sometimes this is very much a bias. And a bit on the judgmental side. I think what sometimes empowers scoffing is self-awareness is not for the faint of heart.